Good evening and welcome to our program, Women to Women. I'm Carol Paz, your hostess, and we have a very special guest returning for the second program that she's doing with us, Ann Bednarski. But before we turn to Ann again and get involved in her column writing for the Nevada Appeal, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Villa Basque Deli and Cafe, home of Pete's famous Basque chorizo right here in Carson City, as well as Carpa Nevada LLC, importer of fine Portuguese olive oils, aged Italian balsamic vinegar, and international teas. So, Ann, I welcome you back again, the second program with you.
Thank you very much.
You know, we established on our first program that you are a teacher, and a very fine teacher, during the periods of, is it the 60s, 70s, 80s? What decades were you in there? We never really talked about that.
67 until 2012.
All right. And you have a 30-year experience background in education. And she brings that background to her writing for the Nevada Appeal. And in the spring of this year, I was taking a look at the Appeal, reading some of the pages of opinion comments, and I came across Ann's column. And I'm going to put my glasses on here for the first time on television, okay, where her commentary is called Choices and Priorities Skewed. And I was interested because I was wondering, what is Ann thinking about? What priorities? How are they all mixed up? How are they clashing with perhaps what she believes or what her experience is? So I read it, and her very first sentence caught my attention, which says, "Something simply does not seem right. Do you feel the tension and angst that is permeating our lives?" And she hooked me right there with that lead statement. So, Ann, I do feel tension, and I think a lot of our viewers out there have some idea of what we're talking about. There is an anxiety level, there is an angst, that things are happening very quickly. Not only in technology, but in changes in education, changes in politics, things that have kind of caught us off guard because there seems to have been a more stable, and sometimes I want to use the word traditional, that may be out of sync, but there was a time when we felt more secure. We felt more certain about what next year or the next 6 months, and that's kind of been blown apart. So I was wondering, in your column that you share with us, what is this particular angst or anxiety? What's the skewing of values that has you really concerned?
What has me most concerned is the shift from academics to socialization of children, which works very hard, in my opinion, to further diminish the family. Now, this was just written a couple of months ago.
Right. Okay, now I know that my viewers are going to have a question. And I understand, I think, where you're coming from. But a part of a child's upbringing, his first or her first experiences with socialization are within the family, right?
Correct.
And then we move them into the public school system or the private school system, or in this case, these days, charter school system, alternative schools. And again, a new socialization implements what they've already brought with them from home. So if parents or listeners of our program were to say, well, how can socialization be mixed up, Ann? Help us to understand that. What do you mean by that?
Well, I could give you several names of students who spend more time in school than they do at home. I'm thinking of a little girl I had as a student. She got up at 5:30 in the morning, and I said, "Tell me about your day." And she said she gets up and she gets dressed. The first thing that was missing is she didn't have breakfast at home. And she said, I walk down the street and I meet the other kids, and then we walk to school, and then they feed us breakfast. And this girl, what I will say to parents, and it's very important, if your child is not at grade level by second grade, it's much easier to do second grade again than it is to have to tell a student when he's 15 years old that he doesn't know how to read or he hasn't math skills. But this girl, they kept passing her and passing her. My expression is, if you don't have basics, you're drowning by third grade. And by fourth grade, you've been down twice and you're ready to go the third time. And we promote kids, but we don't challenge them. We don't say to them, how would you like to do this? We don't make them think. We don't expect them to think. We shovel things to them. And it's amazing. When I was in grade school, I had a friend of mine wanted to reach something. I never forgot this because I think this is the funniest but most meaningful. She wanted to reach something in the cupboard that was too high. She said to her mother, how can I get that? And her mother said, use your head. And so she was trying, and she said, and her mother started laughing, and she said, okay, that didn't work, right? But anyway, she then figured out, and she was maybe 5 years old.
Okay.
And so she figured out she could move a chair, but she did it. And that's what we tend to step in and say, oh, I'll do it. You know, you can't.
Or that's not right.
Yeah.
Here's how you need to do it.
This is how you do it. And kids have great brains, and they say we use 5 or 6% of our brain matter. And everything is so regimented now. And we don't teach the kids. When I was in school, we would spend a whole day writing our name, and we would have a signature. They don't even teach writing anymore.
No, they don't. They don't.
They don't do any reading out loud because I don't know why. Because I can't come up with a good reason.
Perhaps this is one of the reasons, and I began to sense this back in New York in the 5th grade level, that so much of our time had to be used in the classroom for preparing for state tests.
Yeah.
That outcome, the productivity of what our students were able to show on a reading test or a math test or a social studies test was more important to the school system than if they were actually learning.
Right.
So I'm not sure why, in our accountability to parents and in our accountability to students, why we put so much emphasis on testing. I mean, it was there when we were youngsters, it was there when we were going through school, but I remember there was always that measured time that seemed to fit so many activities into the classroom. We were not interrupted at all by phone calls, by people, administrators. That was protected time. And I set foot inside an elementary school recently to find out that when I talked with the secretary in the main office, my call was being transferred to the classroom so I could talk directly with the teacher. And that was a nightmare. I said, how can she take phone calls inside her classroom when she's trying to teach? That's an interruption of all magnitude. So the protection of teaching time has been sacrificed for other things.
Yeah, absolutely. When I ran for school board, I interviewed 700 to 800 kids, and I asked, the question was the same. What can you do? What could you do to make everything in your school better for everybody?
Interesting question.
And this young man named Jason, he won the prize. There was no right, there was no wrong.
Okay.
But he said, I watched him, and we were at Bowers Mansion, and he was walking around, he was thinking and thinking, and I thought, wow, he's got an answer, I'm sure. And he came and he said, I know what it is. And I said, what? And he said, it's respect. The teachers don't respect the students don't respect the teachers and the students don't respect the parents. And he's right.
How old was he?
8.
Wow. What perception?
And he said if we would just be nice and listen. And I said, well, you get my vote. That's what we need to do.
And I think in your column, Anne, you come back indirectly with the pace of living today, which causes a lot of anxiety in all of us. Whether we're talking about the pace of the parents' working schedule, we're talking about the pace of homework that needs to be done, needs to be tackled, and there's no one there at home to help them with it. The pace of living, we have to question, is it worth it? What are we accomplishing, really? How are we helping one another with this rapid race to where? What goal is it that we're after? What are we trying to achieve with a very hurried life schedule? I haven't been able to answer that yet.
I don't know. I know that it takes such a little bit of time I used to tell parents, all you got to do is pat your child on the head or say hello. A silly question, I think, is parents say, well, how was school? Oh, it was fine.
That's the end.
That's it. and no one is happy.
Right. The communication has broken down. And there are interesting ways of asking children when they come home from school about that day, about certain activities, etc., about their friendships, about somebody new that they met or talked with. And again, it's taking the time to ask those questions in different ways, spending time around the supper table. Your reference to having your favorite time of the day was to be home at night for supper with everybody around the table.
Absolutely.
Because everybody got an opportunity to share in the discussion.
And
How great that is.
It was about a half hour or 45 minutes. So every one of us had something, an opportunity to talk or to debate.
And there's what your student at Bowers Mansion was saying to you as an answer. I'm not sure anybody respects anybody's opinion anymore.
Right.
And you had that respect from parents. The time and the environment were respectful of your opinions. And that is missing very much. And it affects everything that we do, how we handle our relationships, how we communicate. So I want to say thank you, Anne, very much for bringing to our attention in your articles here in the Nevada Appeal questions that we need to be asking and thinking about, because it's going to make a difference in the future for all of us. For all of us.
I believe parents should stop expecting the school to do their job. Schools make terrible parents.
And parents should also expect of themselves that is their responsibility and
Absolutely.
Take it seriously. So everyone hold that thought. We're coming back to the second half in just a moment.
Blast into summer with Carson Nugget's $1 million red, white, and blue summer giveaway, where we are giving away scooters all summer long. And with daily free play giveaways, cash bash weekends, outdoor barbecues, and more. Come in today to heat up your summer.
Hi, I'm Stephen Lincoln with CarsonCityHomes.com, Carson City's original online real estate resource.
At CarsonCityHomes.com, you get effective and easy-to-use tools to help you select your next home today. With our easy-to-use website, you can search listings throughout Northern Nevada and narrow the results by selecting every facet, quirk, and quality you desire. Visit CarsonCityHomes.com. Welcome back to the second half of our program, Women to Women. We have Anne Bednarski with us, who is well qualified in so many ways to speak her mind here. And before we come back to the situation of schools and students and parenting, I'd like to thank, first of all, our sponsors for this half, which is carsonnow.org. It's the place on the internet to go for the latest breaking news here in Carson City. We'd also like to thank Apex SCF, who teaches the latest methods in personal and corporate safety. And also the Nevada Appeal and the Record Courier, who are always so supportive of our local businesses, our small businesses, to visit them, to shop there, and to be on the lookout for their book of coupons on their Sunday editions. So let's return to Anne. Anne, you raised so many questions, okay? And Of course, the public is going to have controversy with the issue of schools do not make good parents, okay? The schools and the teaching staff would like to see kids who are being parented at home come into our classes, and it's an extension, okay, of caring. It should be an extension of the atmosphere of learning, respect, etc. But not all of those things are taught these days, and sometimes we get the feeling that there's a fear of parents with their children. And before we come to that issue, I'd like to just say, Anne, if we want to read more of your columns and more of your opinions and your observations, how many times in the Nevada Appeal do you appear with your column?
Every Saturday.
Okay.
On the opinion page.
And do you ever get feedback of any kind?
Such fantastic feedback. I would love to say thank you to every single person who has called me, stopped me, or said in the store, "Are you the one?" And I said, "That's me." And I'm particularly happy that there's a growing number of young people reading the column who are raising little children. And that thrills me because I've been there, I've done that, and I want to hear from them. I'd love to hear from them.
So your audience is really being drawn into this column. So my question to you, Anne, is do you see a fear in parenting these days with their children? What are parents afraid of?
I think there are so many things that they are required to do. The government seems to be thinking for everyone. The schools with the uniform issue, with the not a opt-in, you have to opt out of programs that have nothing to do with academics.
Okay, so that's one issue.
That's one great big issue.
Okay, and you stress uniforms or the schools thinking for us as families or the government thinking for us. Where do you specifically want to address that? Where do you see that happening way too often?
Well, I was encouraged with all the kids and all the parents who came to the uniform meetings.
Here in Carson City.
And then I was disappointed to see there isn't, I don't know why they have to spend time on a questionnaire, and it's not essential.
Okay, now the questionnaire, for those of us who weren't at that meeting, was addressed how?
When I inquired about the questionnaire, it hadn't been prepared yet.
Okay, so the questionnaire...
I want to know why they're spending time writing a questionnaire. I want to know why Governor Sandoval's learn to read and then read to learn is not happening by third grade. Why isn't it?
Okay.
But we're worried about uniforms and sex education in kindergarten. That's insane.
Its priorities are...
Skewed.
Okay, priorities are skewed. All right, let me ask you another question here, and we can come back to this as well. Okay, another fear that I sensed in the classroom, the more affluent the middle class became, the more wealth they had to buy things with, kind of brought on a neglect of family relationships and family communication. As long as they could pay for these activities for their children to be in, as long as they could buy a video game, as long as they could buy a television set, to the point where sometimes there were 5 and 7 television sets in one home. And those articles became the babysitter in many ways, the time-consuming companion, rather than time between parent and child to talk.
I'm going to say I don't think that has a lot to do with affluence. I think it has to do with tremendous peer pressure, and television promotes absolutely no values.
Well, now, I might take issue with that. How do you mean that?
I mean, commercial television.
Okay.
I'm not talking cable channels, but the I can't even stand to listen. The scripts.
The program
promote
right.
promiscuity, drug use, theft,
violence.
violence, violence, violence. When you think, if you think a 5-year-old child has been on this earth less than 2,000 days, and they don't know, they don't have the ability, they don't have the experience to process this. And there's so much violence that when you see something as tragic as the Boston explosions, and you turn the channel and you can see another, what's the difference? It's not real to kids. And so when they actually see something happen, they think that person's going to get up and walk away and be on the next episode. That's not true.
That's not true.
And, you know, freedom of speech has been so seriously abused. And we don't talk. It's very unusual for two people to sit and talk. We Facebook or we text or we, I don't text and I don't do Facebook.
I don't either.
I would rather, I love to go places and listen to what people are talking about. But the truth is, increasingly, they're not talking, they're texting.
Yes. And as a result, it is a form of communication, but it doesn't have that kind of depth to it. It doesn't have that kind of thinking of depth to it.
It doesn't have eyes. People express, you express so much with your eyes. And
it's body language. It's part of that communication.
And to touch somebody and
Yes.
say, how do you do? I like to shake a hand, and I don't want to text you and say,
No.
I would like to meet you.
Or you put an arm around someone for encouragement or for consolation. Whether it's a student, remember when we used to be able to put an arm around a student, a 5th grader or even an 11th grader, if they were downcast, if they were depressed, if they were hurting, and that moment between teacher and student was highly respected. And it was a gift.
I was
of
a school tutor in San Diego for several school districts, and I tutored students who had been in an accident and couldn't be in school for. And one day they called me in, and they said, because I would see kids with one side of their body has a broken leg, the other one has a broken arm. They've been in a tragic accident, or they've had a serious surgery, or they have some condition that makes a lot of things difficult. And the administration called me in, and they said, you cannot touch a student anymore. And I said immediately, well, then find yourself another tutor. Because I got to say, hey, I can't believe you did this.
And you know, Ann, in my teaching days back in New York, there was a 5th grader who purposefully put out his foot to trip a little kindergarten girl who was coming along. Whether he knew her, I don't know. They weren't on the same bus. I checked that out. And when he tripped her, she fell on her face. She had a little pair of spectacles, glasses, and they shattered because she hit terrazzo tile floor. And I took her to the nurse. She was crying. I came back, and to that boy, I put him up against a wall with just one hand, not forcefully, but just, I looked him in the face and I said, why on earth did you do that to a 5-year-old? You're 11 years old. What are you doing? His mother was a police officer in the community. I was brought into the principal's office and admonished, never touch a student. And even though the principal saw me, what I did and how I did it, she didn't want any trouble with a police officer from the community with her child in there.
See, that's...
And I said to my principal, times have really changed, haven't they? I didn't slam the kid against the wall. I didn't push him forcefully. I just stopped him for a moment to have him think, why would you ever do something like that? There is a fear that parents today have with their children, that if they discipline, if they talk with their children in a very serious way, what is the chance that that child, whether it's a 7-year-old or a 17-year-old, will go to the authority and say, you know, there's abuse going on in my home. This is how skewed parenting has become.
I think there's abuse which teaches children. There's abuse on television every day. That's the That's the sad part about it.
And it's not perceived as abuse in that particular home, perhaps. When a child is watching violent movies, violent scenes, sexual promiscuity, language, that home, if there's a parent in it, is either not listening or they don't perceive it as anything that's different than what the child hears every day, every place else. And that's pathetic. That's heartbreaking. That's heartbreaking.
Well, when I was in the classroom, as far as attire, if someone dressed, I would say, "I'm sorry, you are distracted. I can't do my job." I didn't have any problem. I don't have any problem saying to someone, "I do not entertain that kind of language," because if you respect me, but more so if you respect yourself,
you won't use that.
You won't use there's,
Right.
Or I have been known to hand somebody a dictionary and say, "Find 10 words that you could replace." I love the dictionary.
Me too. And I think when you give a challenge like that to a young person or to an adult, and you say, "Here's a dictionary. There are at least 10 to 15 other words that you might use instead of that one. Would you please help me understand what you're trying to say with the use of the other words?"
Yeah.
Because this one's not helping me at all.
Yeah.
It's just distancing.
And see, the
yourself
other
from it.
thing, speaking of using the dictionary, we don't have kids write anything anymore. They take tests and they push in bubbles. And so you ask them to write a sentence and they say, "A sentence. What is a sentence?" And that's too bad because basic skills have gone to the wayside. They are actually have become the auxiliary to what the school does. The school does. What I was going to say about testing is my 800 kids I interviewed, my little doorknob said, "Teach more, test less." Because every time you're taking a test, you're not learning anything. You're regurgitating what you have been prepared. And the test, the only thing a test proves is how good you are at taking a test.
Basically, that's
And
correct.
it's big business.
And do you know, do you recall the days, and this was true for me at Ohio State as well as Alma High School, in order for us to be able to answer a question, we had to defend it with facts. We had to defend it with a line of thought, a progression in our line of thought, that the professor or the teacher could see where we were going. We had taken the materials, we had assimilated them into ourselves and thinking about it, the thinking process. Then we had to write a definitive answer. And usually those answers consisted of 3 paragraphs. An intro, the presentation of your facts, and then the conclusion. I don't think that happens a lot anymore.
No, I think writing doesn't happen a lot.
Yes. Well, you know, I'm going to really encourage our viewers out there to read Anne's column every Saturday because she's posing questions that are going to affect all of us one way or the other. And our children are the future. They are the future leaders. And we're already in a big problem in our country, as are other countries, for leadership. And the leadership means making tough decisions during tough times and sticking to those decisions because you've thought it out. There's a plan A, and we have to be creative enough that if plan A gets thrown off base, somehow we can incorporate a plan B or ameliorating circumstances to help get there. We can't be afraid to make tough choices. So I want to say thank you again so much for being with us. It's been a pleasure, and you have me as a reader and as a communicator with you from now on.
Okay.
I hope that's the same with all of you out there. Take care. Have a good evening. We'll be back with you next week. Good night.